Oh, welcome everybody. Had a temporary scary moment there where the entire screen went blank, and I didn't know if that meant something was wrong with Zoom or other technical problems, but it came back after I hit the right button. So anyway, we have several things I wanted to give you guys up front before we get into the last major topic now for this semester, which is early modern architecture. And two things up front I'll say right off the bat here about why this is an important unit. I admit to a certain bias. That's what I got my master's degree in. Was I did my thesis on the woman who we're going to cover in some depth, and there's only one other reading assignment and one other source where there are reading assignments for, and that's the Julia Morgan book that I wrote, gosh, 14 years ago, and it is something that you would want to make sure you do keep up with the reading because it parallels what we're going to talk about over the next two lectures, or sorry, 2 weeks. I meant 2 weeks. In other words, a unit on 20th century architecture is important enough to give it, well, 4 lectures. Obviously, we have 2 Zoom lectures a week here. Let me do the speaker view here. Okay, there we go. And there are reasons for that because in a lot of texts, some of you may have noticed this, at least if you have an interest in architecture, as some of you do from your extra credit options. A few of you have done on architecture. Remember that option is a very easy one. Because of the pandemic, I don't require anymore like I used to for people to go inside a building and shoot 3 or 4 details inside, as well as one exterior view of that building. You can just give me 4 different views of the building itself from the outside, because of course the practicality of accessing interiors now isn't all that great. So it's a pretty easy option, but there's an even easier aspect for those of you. Almost everyone, I think, lives in Sonoma County, or at least not far away, maybe in northern half of Marin, and that is in Petaluma. There are 4 Julie Morgan houses within a mile of each other, easily viewable and accessible and photographable, all of the above from the sidewalk, which is an important detail. I'll explain why in a minute. When I get to that point, I will hold up the pages. There one chapter in my book that covers her domestic work, her residential work, and she did a lot more in the North Bay than the other famous Bay architects like Bernard Maybeck. She did 5 buildings in the North Bay, 4 in Petaluma and 1 in Santa Rosa. And I'll show you pictures of all of those. And then you'll have that perhaps as another option for extra credit every time you do turn in any one set of 4 photos that are all of one site. Or in the case of the Julia Morgans, I give you a sort of more flexible option, just one photo of the outside of each of those 4 houses. It's pretty easy, just straight head on, whatever, view you can get of the whole building from the sidewalk. You then, with those 4 color images in a PDF, get 10 points. You do need to identify yourself, of course, and the addresses of the buildings. Probably you should, because in most cases, if it's a public building, all you need to put is the name of the building, like a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or whatever it is, historic site. But if it's 4 photos of one each of different locations, you should just put the address below them or attach that in some way on the PDF file. Okay, before we get to all of that, I got a good amount of papers, and I've looked over enough of them. I've graded enough of them that know that they look pretty good overall. So I'm encouraged. And as everyone should know, in case it applies, I know it will to some of you listening to today, if you didn't get your paper in on time, it would be only 5 points off if you got it in before midnight on the 17th. Now, I should send an email. I'll do that as a reminder, because I moved the due date back to the 10th based on there being a discrepancy. Somehow the merge function, I don't, my wife made the PDF files on her because she has that app. I don't on this laptop that I'm talking to you from. So for what it's worth, that makes a difference for some of you, because here we go. Welcome. We're just talking about you have still a little bit more time before the 10-point discount or deduction, I should say. The papers aren't for sale, right? A 10-point deduction applies for 1 week late or more. And that would be advantageous for you to take it, the option of getting your, if you didn't already turn in your second paper, you should do so before midnight on Wednesday, because it won't be more than 5 points off. It'll just be counted as less than a week. Anything after midnight on Wednesday the 17th, and I'll send an email to remind everyone. I'll do that right after we sign off here on this lecture. That gives you more than 48 hours to turn one in, because who knows, 5 points could make the difference between an A and a B, or B and a C. Obviously, points are the way the grade is calculated, and every point counts. So that's one important announcement. I don't think I had that even. I sent everyone an email telling you your paper wouldn't be late if it was turned in between last Monday and midnight on Wednesday. So I got a few papers in that window, and they weren't counted late. So that's good. But 5 points off is better than 10. So you still have that option if you didn't do your paper yet. Or, I mean, didn't turn it in. Hopefully, if you're going to do that, you started working on it. So keep that in mind. Midnight, Wednesday, no more than 5 points off. Okay. Now, other extra credit options are some neat exhibits. I'm not going to go into the specifics of them, but some really interesting exhibits that are coming up or have just opened at the De Young, the Legion of Honor, and the Asian Art Museum. Well, that one's been up for a while. The immersive exhibit of Asian art themes from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. We're meaning Japan, China, and Southeast Asia would be Thailand, Vietnam. I've been in that part of Asia, as well as the coast of China. And there's some incredibly beautiful motifs in their historic buildings and towns and cities. And then India and Pakistan and that South Asia. So that exhibit isn't a painting or it's at the Museum of the Asian Art Museum of all the visual mediums, right? Meaning sculpture. Well, it's not so much painting in Asian art, but there are some, drawings and well, engravings isn't the right word, but I mean, kind of graphic arts, as well as sculpture, and of course, other fine and applied arts like ceramics. Some of the most beautiful ceramics ever made were from China 1,000 years or more ago. So those are all on permanent display anyway. It's worth a trip to the Asian Art Museum for those alone, but also the new exhibit that'll be there, I think, through February. So obviously through the end of this semester is, I forget the name of it, but it's an Asian art themed immersive. You couldn't mistake it for anything else. The new exhibit that is getting good reviews. I've read about in the Chronicle. Oh, sorry. Let me let Justine in. Hi, Justine. Now we're just finishing up with some extra credit options. So you have those museum options. Okay. And those museum options are worth 10 points. And all you have to do is show me, only a few people have done this so far, show me a screenshot of the ticket and the date and time will be in the museum's name will be on that. Or a copy of the order where you paid for that. I'm going to assume you didn't buy a ticket and not go. Okay. Maybe you want to try it that way, but the goal is not just for your benefit, of course, for your grade. Obviously, that's a primary consideration for everybody, but to get you out to see art in the real world beyond just this little screen we're sitting in front of. And each of us, I assume you're mostly on your laptops and in textbooks or online. Art in the real world is the point. I hope it inspires you to do that. Okay, so you have the architecture option. I'll get to the specifics of the Julia Morgan buildings in just about a minute or two. The museums, and then there's the films. I already covered that. Any of the films that you can find from any source that you can watch and write 2 pages about what you learned about any artist, any artist. Usually they should be about a single artist because that's more likely to be the focus of a biographical film or documentary. Anything over an hour about any artist from any period, any style, any culture, any era, that you can watch and write 2 pages about is another 10 points. Articles are worth 5 points. That's pretty easy. Articles on, specific artists, like every semester I see articles on records set at recent auction for, Picasso. Actually, that happened recently. In fact, some of his drawings were auctioned in New York, I think. And, they were a little more than scribbles. They weren't that minimal, but they weren't detailed drawings. They were just small little things, and they each got some ridiculous price of several $100,000 or something. So that's a topic. Anything relating to visual arts that you find online, from whatever source, newspaper, website, and it's at least a page, and you forward it to me, and identify yourself, of course, in the class you're in and all that. Then you get it 5 points. And then lastly, well, we can't do the architecture. I was thinking of doing an architecture walking tour. Maybe what I'll do is, if you contact the people in the homes by Julia Morgan and Bernard Mebeck, two of the architects you will need to know about for the final. Either one or both of their work will be on the final. I can tell you for sure. As soon as we get started with the slides, I will repeat, as I always have, which slides are really important, so much so I won't cut them to study list and have a high probability of being on the final. And those would include one each at least by Bernard Mebeck, the first green architect really in America, and Julia Morgan, the first independent woman American architect. We won't get to their work today. It'll probably be on Wednesday by the time we get to them. Okay, so then the last one is the novels I wrote, and that's, I know, low down on everyone's priority list, but a couple people have already done that, and if they chose, one of them did, chose to write a review, and it doesn't matter what your honest opinion in a few lines. It doesn't have to be a paragraph, a few, a couple sentences about what you thought about those. The one that does relate to the topics we're covering for this next 2 weeks, which is 20th or early modern architecture, 20th century, basically, architecture, is the one of the murder mystery, which I deliberately focused on that because I was teaching art and architecture, architectural history at City College in Berkeley, although now it was called Vista then, but anyway, it's now Berkeley City College. Some of you know of it. It's a feeder school, just like Santa Rosa JC for UC Berkeley. Transfer students. And so we would take those walking tours and go inside these buildings. And so when I had already by that time pretty much left the real estate profession, yes, I was. I told everyone, full disclosure, a full-time real estate agent before I started teaching college classes. Crazy things happen in the 80s and 90s in real estate. So I put some of that together along with a murder mystery about the Russian and Italian mafias fighting each other for territory, which actually has happened in a few American cities after the Cold War ended. And so it's set in the early 90s. But the point is, there's about 20 sites in there you could use for extra credit. They could give you direct information about where they are, where some of the scenes are, or the bodies are found of this poor agent who's being framed in different houses, including Julia Morgan design house and a Maybach, which has never happened that I know of, the actual dead bodies of former clients inside a real estate open house, but could happen. So that's called the open house murders. And that's, you don't have to even necessarily read the whole thing to, show me that you downloaded it. Again, just showing me a screenshot of the last chapter or a purchase order, whatever, and date for that is worth 15 points, as well as the one about growing up on the south side of Chicago during the civil rights movement in the early 60s. And that one is called South Side Story. Anyway, those are each worth 15 points if you show me you did download them or order them. And if you choose to post a review of either one, it's 10 points. So there you go. I'm recapping the extra credit options. I'll summarize it in writing at some point, probably before Thanksgiving, and send that out. Your deadline for all extra credit is by the end of finals exams. So that's a later deadline than the late paper deadline. I can't be grading late papers and finals and calculating your grades and submitting them all before New Year's Eve and get it done. I've never missed a deadline. This real wood right below, or my computer's sitting on a lamp table here. And that means that I want to keep the commitment for your sake. So some of you need to know the grades for whatever reason, but especially if you're transferring, or otherwise applying for, some other 4-year college or scholarship or work type opportunities. So I get my grades in on time. So bottom line, last thing, and then we'll get started with today's topic, is I don't accept any late work. I'm talking about first or second paper. That would apply to after the Sunday night prior to, meaning before, up until, but not during final exams week. I have to have a cutoff, and that's in your syllabus. And I'll repeat that. I'll send you an email to remind you. Okay, but I do accept extra credit during final exams week because that doesn't take very long to log in, up until the weekend after finals, which I think is final exams in Saturday. Some people have Saturday classes. I used to teach one. Hated it. The worst commute of the week during summer, of course, when it was high wine tourism season. So, but that would mean I'll send you another email and remind you it's on your syllabus. The deadline for any extra credit would be, after the final, even because for our class that'll be on a Wednesday, and then you'll have through the end of that week to submit any extra credit if you feel you want or need that. Okay, any questions about that or your paper, your second papers, or anything we covered last week? Anybody before we start today's topic? All right, and I'll stick around afterwards, of course, as I always do for any other questions. Okay, I'm holding this up because I don't know, but I assume it's still at the student bookstore where you can do curbside pickup. This book is one that there will be slides taken from. I didn't take these slides. These are taken by one of the best photographers I've ever worked with. I've had now five books on architecture published, and the last three were all from the same publisher, two of which are still in print. This one and the one on Frank Lloyd Wright. And this one's in its fourth printing, I think now. So it's only $22, I think it is, on Amazon, right? If you hadn't already got it. But let me show you the opportunities, and then we'll get started with the first must-know slides for you to get easily, especially if you live in Petaluma. Oh, anybody hear about the 500-pound bear? That was all over the news last night. They got stuck in a tree 75 feet up.
That's so sad.
Well, no, he wasn't hurt. I understand he went into the, isn't that right? Or anybody hear some update? I hope he wasn't harmed. He was lured down to the ground by food. Well, what else would work with a wild animal, right? That's how I get my cat out of, I had to just do that right before I turned on my camera. Get my cat out of the room, or you'd see her probably walk across, a 14-pound female cat across the front of this would disrupt the lecture. I'm sure you would be able to see the slides. Well, yeah, you could, I guess, right? Yeah. Anyway, here we go. So was the bear's okay though, right? Somebody said
the bear's okay, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. Well, somebody said it was sad. I thought, something else.
I just heard it was scared. I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, he was hours and hours stuck in a tree and didn't know what to do. Some wise animal control people who do know what to do managed to. Actually, I just went here with a friend of mine who is, I can honestly say, the beneficiary of a good education at the JC and letters of recommendation from professors, including me and a couple others she took from, and she's about to get accepted to UC Berkeley. I'm knocking on wood here. It's not official yet, but I helped by writing one of those several letters she asked for. That is something I always offer to all my students, those who earn an A. I do have to have some kind of a, benchmark for that. And that's to write letters of recommendation anytime you need one, as long as you give me more than 3 or 4 days notice, hopefully a week or more. Okay, here we go. Here are 3 of the Julia Morgan homes. Now I always have to, because it's like, reading Da Vinci's notes, which are backwards, of course, in the mirror. These are all in Petaluma within less than a mile of each other, a few blocks. The addresses are in my book. So you should have the book because you will be tested on a couple, at least one of the slides that's from the book will be on the, if not maybe 2, on the final, and of course for extra credit options. These are all in the old section, I call it the old town of Petaluma. And they are visible from the street. These photos were taken by the photographer that I was working with at the time. She's actually since retired, who took the exteriors and interior photos. You're going to see some of those during the next 2 weeks of any Julia Morgan or Maybachs that I may have. Yeah, I will have some to show you, are taken by a guy I still work with.
Now, what page is that on?
Okay, I was just about to tell you.
Oh.
Good timing. Yeah, 170 and 71. And then here's the one that some of you may already know, even though you probably didn't know anything about who designed it. Because you ever go to the B of A that has its own parking lot on that kind of slight up, almost like a little lower lying hill or rise above, well, I forget what the intersection is there. Isn't it? I haven't taught at the Petaluma campus since before the pandemic, so I forgot what the cross street is that cuts north, east and west across the 101, where the campus is on, of course, the
East Washington.
Thank you. Yes, Washington. So this is on the West Washington side, and it's above the B of A. This one here. Whoops, I meant this one. That's one of my favorites. It was the subject of a whole feature article in the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. When
what is the name of the book?
Okay, here it goes. Here's the cover. It's on your syllabus. Yeah. And it should be in your bookstore, but you can
Oh,
get it
yeah.
for less. You can get it for less on Amazon, I'm sure. Well, I can't imagine the bookstore offers you guys discounts. They ought to, but they don't. It's $30. That's still pretty affordable, but it's not even 20. It's 24. It's 20 some, 22, 23 or $4 on Amazon. And I just checked, at least as of this weekend, it was still available. So we are going to cover this woman because she was a modern woman before that term existed, independent, self-reliant, never depended on a male partner, started her own firm before. Anyway, we'll cover all this when we get to the must-know slides of her work, and broke new ground in designing buildings in the way that Frank Lloyd Wright and Bernard Maybeck, who I think is equally important, but of course he's not as well known as Frank Lloyd Wright, but he was doing the same kind of environmentally sensitive design and what we call green design today, way before anyone else in the 1890s. And she was a student of his at Berkeley in the 1890s, the only female in the architecture program. There wasn't even a program, which is one class that Maybeck taught there. And he saw her talent and her skill, and he advised her to apply for the school where he went to in Paris. And we'll talk about that when we get to the notes section of one of the must-knows of her work. I think we have two on the syllabus that are must-know slides. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the first must-know here. And we're starting with earlier. Now, when we say early modern, or I say, well, actually anybody who says early modern, it's a little different than some of you might assume, because what could that mean? It could mean different things to different people. But in terms of architecture, we're mostly talking about from the mid 19th century, 1850s. Well, that's what this first slide is from. Let's get this full screen. All the way through about the 1930s. So we're talking about, what is that, about 75, 80 years, 3 generations, several decades of development of architectural styles and techniques, right, for building that are still with us today. So that's what we mean by early modern architecture. Now, that's not a standalone definition, so you guys don't have to have written that, but you'll see that there are a couple, and I'm going to go slowly because I know most of you have never heard these. I think the 5 main movements of early modern architecture, we'll do that. In fact, why don't we do it right now before I go into the notes for this first must-know slide. The 3 main features of skyscrapers, we'll probably get that far today. Might not be till Wednesday. Okay, so let's do that. Before I give you the notes on this, that they're, obviously for the meaning and all that, let's do the 5. I will give you, it's not something where you have 5 new standalone definitions. That would be overkill. I'm trying to keep it from being, too much for you to, although you can read them off your notes, obviously. So you won't need to write a standalone definition of any term except skyscrapers. And that somehow didn't get on the bottom of this list. When we get to that, I will remind you. That's the only standalone definition I'm going to ask you to write as a separate one single term. Okay, so this, in other words, here we go. The 5, everyone should have this in front of you now, right? And it's the bottom half of the last page of your terms to know handout. 5 modern movements of early modern architecture. It's a list which you may be asked to, or it'll be a true false. Remember, that's how I bring up definitions on the midterm. I did that. The same thing exactly will be the way I'll do it on the final. I might say the 5 main movements of early modern architecture include X, Y, and Z. If one of them is not part of that, then the whole definition is false. If they are all from that list, it's true. So that's, of course, the same as how I did with definitions in the, tested people for the correct use of those definitions on the midterm. Same thing applies to the final. Okay, so here we go. Here's that list slowly, and I'll repeat it to make sure everybody gets it. Okay. First, we can start. There's no chronological order here. Okay, I want to make sure that's clear. Nor is it tied to the order you're going to see slides in this class. Okay, so we'll start with skyscrapers. Early here's the term, okay, Chicago school. So I'll say it again. The right term is Chicago school. You'll say, huh? What? I'll explain in a minute. But Chicago school or early skyscrapers is the first of the 5 you should write down now as part of that list. Everybody got that? Again, I'll repeat that. The first of the 5 that I'm giving you with no particular chronological order of the 5 main movements of 20th century architecture is just very simply 2 words. It was called the Chicago school. And I would put in parentheses, i.e. early skyscrapers. Let's save the definition for that when we get to a first slide of a skyscraper. Okay, we're just doing the list now. Everybody's clear. All right, the second one is Prairie School. I think most people know how to write Prairie, but just in case, it's with a capital P now. It's a style labeled with a, it's a proper term, so it has a capital P. Prairie, P-R-A-I-R-I-E, Prairie School. Okay, put it in parentheses, early modern houses. And again, there'll be some detail describing how you recognize what is a Prairie Style house when we get to, well, Frank Lloyd Wright, he coined the term, he invented the technique. It's still being used to this day. Some people call those ranch houses. That's the more, pedestrian term for it. By the way, I'll say it again. The second feature, main movement of 20th century, early 20th century architecture, or early modern. We're using the phrase early modern, sorry. So the second one is Prairie School, in parentheses, early modern houses, okay? The third one would be, and let's try to, now I'm gonna try to make this somewhat chronological here. Bauhaus, B-A-U-H-A-U-S, B-A-U-H-A-U-S. It's a German word. The Bauhaus or international school. It's either term, they're synonymous. So most historians use the term Bauhaus because it was coined in Germany and the movement started there. Again, capital B-A-U-H-A-S, slash, I would do slash, right? / backwards, this is my international style. And then, in parentheses, okay, you would want to write, just a brief little thumbnail explanation. Again, in parentheses for this third of the main movements of early modern architecture would be glass and steel boxes. I mean, it almost sounds like I'm being sarcastic, and that's not my phrase. Glass and steel boxes. In other words, buildings that don't have a lot of decoration or none and are made out of glass and steel. We see them all over the world, of course, now. They started much earlier than 100 years ago. Okay, so that's the third one. The fourth one would be First Bay tradition. That bears some explaining when we get to, that's Julia Morgan and Maybeck, all the great Bay architects we're going to cover in some detail over the next 2 weeks. So just that First Bay tradition, but then again, as a way of sort of giving a little hint of what that means before we get to those slides. First, just like sound 3 words, Bay tradition. In parentheses, you should write environmentally integrated design. Environmentally integrated design. I mean, the buildings blend in with their sites, their environment. So again, that one is first. This feature would be the fourth one. First Bay tradition, in parentheses, environmentally integrated design. Okay, and then the fifth one would be postmodernism. Postmodernism. Okay, there really isn't any way to summarize that in a parentheses phrase. So just that phrase is the fifth one, postmodernism, which again, you'll get the definitions, not the definitions, I'm not to say, the notes on the meaning of each of these styles for those slides that are examples when we get to them, okay? All right, does anybody need me to repeat any part of that 5 set of early? Sorry, go ahead. Anybody need me to repeat one of them? I went slow enough. Hopefully you all have those. All right, here we go. Now we're doing the notes on this slide. I hope as you've been looking at this, I assume you have while I'm giving you those 5 terms. This is a uniquely modern looking building, and it blew people's minds away when they saw it because nobody was ready for this. Okay, here we go. It is the Crystal, it's the first one on week 14's list of must know slides. Paxton, the architect, Paxton is Paxton. The Crystal Palace, just like it sounds, 3 words. The Crystal Palace, 1851. Well, you can tell by the photo, right? Unless you just never seen old photos. This is an old photo. It was taken when the building had first opened in 1851. So it should look like something much more modern. It ought to, of course, if you have ever traveled outside of, well, even in the Bay Area, right? Early modern buildings usually weren't this far ahead of their time. So what was its purpose? Here's the first fact now you should have in your notes under meaning of this slide. This was the site, this building was the site, just this building, one building was the site for the first World's Fair held in London in 1851. That's why the date is 1851. And we're looking at the entrance to the first World's Fair. In other words, an entire World's Fair was held inside one building. That right there is remarkable, just that fact. Okay, and then we have the fact that the building is entirely made out of glass and steel. You can't call it Bauhaus, though, because there were decorations. And if you want to, Bauhaus style totally is abandoned all form of decoration. Whereas here, we're still looking at a Victorian era building. This is a nice colored tinted hand. They didn't have color photos that far back, as you probably know. So there were no color photos of the building. However, this one, hand tinted as it was, I'm sure, by an artist who was there on the day it opened. Queen Victoria opened this fair. Of course, she was the Queen of England at that time. Last monarch to have real power in England, at least in the British Empire. Some power. I mean, she managed to get the Marines, the British Marines, to stand back and drop their attempt to take over Hawaii and make it a British colony. She said, no way. They have their own government, get out. That was one of her best moments. If you don't know that, if you've never been to Hawaii or you don't have friends who grew up there, that's why the flag of the state of Hawaii has the British Union Jack in it. It's the only American state flag that does, because they admire the Brits for having kept them independent for another 20 years or 30, was it, until the U.S. Marines took it over, of course. Okay, so Queen Victoria opened this fair. It was the first World's Fair. These are the facts about the meaning. And the building housed the entire fairgrounds under one roof. That right there is revolutionary. The fact that World's Fairs had never been tried, that is also an important fact, because it's the first time that dozens of nations from all around the globe came together to exhibit their best products and inventions. That's what a World's Fair is. I mean, it's entertainment, of course. There's always fun zones or whatever, midways or what they're called now. But the point is that this was not, like you think of as a modern county or state or World's Fair. It was specifically designed to house, I think it was 45 nations, anyway, just say dozens of nations came to this fair to exhibit their best products and inventions to each other, of course. People from all over the world came. I think it was 10 million, just say millions, you can keep it simple. Millions of people came from all over the world to see this World's Fair inside this building. It's a pretty remarkable achievement. And the idea was Prince Albert's, that would be Queen Victoria's husband, who didn't have the power that she did. He was crown prince. He did not want that power. He just did cultural projects like this, which was a pretty successful project because it started, there's still World's Fairs, some of you, right? All around the world, except in our country, sadly. I've been to 3 of them. But our country has too many theme parks, I guess, to compete with the idea of a World's Fair. Epcot's that are, in Florida. Okay, fine. That's not the same thing as a World's Fair. And neither is Las Vegas with all the phony buildings from supposedly all around the world. The real things were what you would see here. The statue of David was on display in this fair. I'm talking about Michelangelo's 19-foot tall sculpture. Well, actually, it's 17 feet. The block of marble was 19 feet. You've all seen it, right? Where he's nude and standing in front of Goliath, looking at him, about to fight him to the death. That famous statue by Michelangelo was transferred to this fair and displayed inside this building. So it was a major event, the first World's Fair. But the building itself was the other part of the meeting you should have now in your notes. Oh, by the way, I'm not cutting this slide from the study list. It's pretty important. But, you know, just because of the fact, yeah, let's leave it this way, because it's a black and white photo, and I could, you know, make it this instead and just use the enlarged version. I'll have to think about it, because the point is that I think this other view gives you a better idea of what was revolutionary about it. The whole building was prefabricated. It's the first public, at least, building. There were houses being prefabricated in Chicago in the 1830s. That's how Chicago got started. They invented prefabricated housing in Chicago in the frontier, pioneer days. Don't have to write that, but it's something most people would never know, of course, but going up there, I always heard that. But this was the first, here's the next fact you should have about the meaning of this. This was the first public building to use a prefabricated method, meaning what? The parts were all made somewhere else and shipped here by train, of course, and assembled on the site. That wasn't done before this for public buildings. So it's the first, at least the first famous or major public building to use the prefabricated materials assembled on the site. And then the final thing is, it was the final fact about the meaning of this, that this building was the largest interior space ever built on Earth, or you could say anywhere in the world if you prefer it that way, until some of you know what building surpassed it. It's outside Washington, D.C. It houses a certain branch of
The Capitol.
That's a good guess, but no.
Oh, wait.
No, it's something even bigger that's not in D.C. It's actually I think it is in Northern Virginia. It was on the news on September 11th. Anybody?
Pentagon?
Yes, exactly. The Pentagon was then the largest building. Now there are bigger buildings in other parts, I think in China and maybe the Middle East. There are larger public buildings even than the Pentagon. But this building, in other words, was the largest interior space ever built. One single structure we're talking about, with the square footage, of course, is how you judge how big interior is. So it had the largest square footage, meaning the largest interior space of any building on Earth for nearly a century, from 1851 till I think the Pentagon opened. You have to know this, but in the 1940s, I know, during World War II. So it is almost 100 years. And this building did not survive World War II. And you might think, sure, the Nazis bombed it. Well, they would have, but it burned down just before, as the war was about to start. Literally, an accidental fire caused it to collapse. Some shorts, you can just say a fire that was started accidentally just before World War II. So it survived nearly 90 years, in other words. I think it doesn't matter what year, like 38 or 39, it burned down. So it wasn't bombed. So I used to think that's why it's no longer there. There's all kinds of plaques and things from it in this park. I don't remember which park it is. It's one of the big parks in London. Okay, so that's plenty of facts about the meaning. Remember, all you have to write is 6 sentences or 6 of those facts. All right, so let's do a formal analysis. Well, we'll start with the fact that it was completely symmetrical. If that's not obvious, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that this section may look like it makes it weighted toward the left in our view, standing in front of it. But there's another wing just like it. And you can see these levels. Look at that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was the equivalent of about an 8 or 9 story building in height. So let's do the space. Okay, the interior could hold up to 200,000 people at once. 200,000 people at once. And it was, now this is maybe the most impressive fact. It's all under the, in the formal analysis is under space. Now, of course, the dimensions. The long wing, it was two intersecting wings, right? And so the long wing, the one that you can see in this picture, right? I'll get a larger view of it there, was nearly half a mile long. Not quite that long, but close. But this is the view we'll use on the exam. So the long wing was, you know, all or nearly or almost a half mile long, and the cross, right, wing, crossing wings are the one that you can see the edge of it there, was about a third of a mile long. It's huge. Of course, that much space inside. I don't know what the square footage was. You don't have to know that. But the fact that it could hold up to 200,000 people, and often did on days when the fair, like, you know, Sundays when everyone was off work, it would have had that many people. That's an immense achievement. Okay, then we have color. Well, from the outside, this looks blue, I know, because it's an old photo and I'm not sure what the fact why. I mean, this is a blue tint to it, but usually they're sepia, right, tone, these old photos. But we can just say this was totally neutral on the structure itself. All it was white, and this may look blue, but that's misleading. It was black painted metal framing, which is a neutral color, with totally transparent glass for the walls. Once again, the colors were neutral, except on the balconies, but you're not going to have to write about that. I'm trying to make it reasonable and keep it simple. Would just use this photo. So all I have to do is write about the exterior when it comes to color and texture and all that. So the exterior was neutral. It was black painted metal framing with transparent glass walls. And those are the two materials. So we go now to texture, right? On that element, it was all real texture. And there were only two textures, the ones I mentioned. Smooth, of course, if it's on exam, you got to always say what kind of texture. Besides, if it's real, but what type of real texture is smooth? Smooth glass and smooth metal. That's it, the whole building. Okay, and then we have the fact that the largest mass would be the long wing, the one that was nearly half a mile. And the second largest mass would be, really it is only two masses, if you break it down that way, was the crossing wing. That was nearly a third of a mile long. Okay, the rhythm should be obvious. The repeated metal framing here, which you can see a little bit better, although this isn't the sharpest photo. You know, it is 1851 after all. You know how they had to have, don't write this, they had to hold the camera still for 30 seconds to get photos. That's why all these people look like blurs. And the building is perfectly in focus. This is very early photography we're looking at here. Anyway, and so what you have is the rhythm of the beams. These are beams, metal beams, and the glass plates. Of course, they're plates, you know, solid plates of glass that are then, you know, hauled by a crane into place and then, of course, fitted into the framework. So it's just that. The rhythm is just the two main structural elements, the repeated shapes of the beams and of the glass panel. You can say panels. It's probably easier to remember. All right, and then we have, is it stable or dynamic? It's almost entirely stable, as you can see in this picture, except for the roof. The roof would be dynamic, of course, and I'm going to go to the next view. So just again, if it's not obvious, right? So only the roof itself on both wings, of course, was dynamic. The whole rest of the building was stable. And then we have modeling would just be the shadows created by the sun coming through the walls. So whatever, you know, the sun was doing on the, you know, during the daytime, of course, would create whatever kind of shadows. So there's no techniques for modeling here. I think I said it was balanced, didn't I? Yeah, and mass, let's see, volume, am I forgetting anything? I don't think so. Texture, modeling, color.
Just visual lines.
Oh, yes, thank you. I knew there'd be one. Thank you. Yes, the lines are just visual. There's no carved lines. Well, there were if you got up. Well, hang on, I meant to go to the, sorry, this one. But you don't have to write this. If you got really close, you could see there's, but that's not even carved line. No, it's all visual line. This looks like it could be carved, but you know what? I've seen much clearer black and white photos of the balconies. There are whole books on this building. It's that famous. So yes, you're right. Exactly. Everybody hear this? For line, last I think of the 9 elements for this slide, and then we'll go on to the next. There's no carved or painted line. It's all visual line, and that's formed by the edges of the building, of course, and of each row of beams. Or you could say the framing. The framing, yeah, that's a simple way to say it, creates visual line only, no painted, drawn, or carved line. Okay, let's move on. Everybody knows what this is, right? Won't be cutting this one from the exam. I always try to put at least one that's so easy that there's no way you should miss it. And this might be that slide for the final now. Eiffel was the architect, but he was more than an architect. We'll say why I say it, what that means in just a minute. Eiffel, Eiffel. The Eiffel Tower, of course, that's spelled the same way, obviously named after the architect or designer. The Eiffel Tower, 1889. I have to stop and ask. I think I remember from the many bios, have been a couple of people in this class been to Paris? Anybody? Anybody here now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
When did you go? And were you able to go up into the Eiffel Tower? Because it was closed for a long time during the early part of the pandemic.
Yeah, one thing that's cool is if you go up to the
Uh-huh.
second level, there's actually a restaurant there. So you can actually, we got lunch and
Yeah. Good French food. Yeah. Or at least, or I think, who knows? I haven't been there in so many years. It was the last time I was in Paris was 04. And it was totally open then, even though there were already some terrorist threats, which they closed it for a while after that one where good God, that was 5 years ago, that nightclub attack that plus a couple others that killed 130 people. They just had the 5th anniversary of it and had a moment of silence, and they turned the lights out on the Eiffel Tower. So when you were there at the restaurant, this is before or during the pandemic?
oh no, that was way before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
was
last time I was there, I don't even know if you were allowed to go up to the restaurant.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I don't know if they kept the restaurants closed when they reopened the tower to visitors, because the observation deck from here is something else. It really is. There's a cornball movie called, I think it's called An American Werewolf in Paris. It's pretty corny, but it does have a neat scene near the beginning where Julie Delpy, you don't know who she is, some of you may know, really a good French actress, been in a lot of movies. Now she's living in the US and I think now is an American citizen. She's trying to commit suicide off the top. Her character, of course, not the actual actress. Off this, and an American comes along just at that moment and saves her. But it gives you some idea of how precarious that would be, and because there's not really any safety barrier. Well, maybe it's been added since the last time I saw it on the news. Okay, anybody else been there though at night? Anybody who's been there? Because I don't remember if it's even open at night. I don't think it is. I think they close
Like
it.
actually up it
Yeah,
at night?
yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember about that.
And so when were you there?
Last time I was there was 3 years ago, but I didn't try to go up it, so I don't know if it was closed or not.
Oh, have you done that before though?
Yeah, but I was only allowed to go up to the second level also, and that was like 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago.
Really? So
Yeah.
before the pandemic, not in any way related to any health issue, right? They were, I didn't know that. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I don't remember why.
So then if you haven't been to the top, my understanding is someone can get extra credit real easy, 5 points. If you find an article that's up to date, it should be within the last month or so. Now that they reopened it sometime in the late summer or early fall, I think you can go all the way to the top where I'm pointing with the cursor. But if you can, it's well worth it because it was, here we go. Let's start with the purpose of this building. Okay, now meaning, of course, in your notes, this was built for a World's Fair in Paris. Of course, the Paris World's Fair of 1889, if you want to get specific. But it also had a symbolic meaning, not just to show off technology, which it was, but to celebrate the 100th anniversary of, anybody know what? 100 years before 1789. I think some of you know. We covered it. The okay, I'm sorry. The French Revolution.
Revolution?
Yes, it's an important point. That's the main reason it got built, because that fair itself was, opened in that year, 1889, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, and this building became the symbol of that fair and of France. Everyone knows now. If you ever know of anything, physically, symbolic of France, it'd be the Eiffel Tower. Of course, it's a world famous image, and it's on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Big surprise, of course. It would have been one of the first structures put on that list back in the 40s when the UN first started. That list, that keeps growing. I think it's over 1,000 sites worldwide now. They're so important to the history of the world that they're worth preserving. And some funds are provided, by the way, from the UN to keep maintaining them. So this is on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as well. It deserves to be. Another fact about it is that it is just under 1,000 feet. I think it's 988 feet tall. Now, that means that it was the tallest human or man-built structure in the world until sometime in the mid-20th century. Does anybody know what building took over that title of the tallest building in the world? Not anymore, but it's still.
The Rocket.
Sorry,
Empire State Building.
That's a good guess, and it did become that building. The Empire State Building became the tallest building in the world for decades. But before it opened, the Chrysler Building beat them to it. The Chrysler Building is the first building in the world in New York, of course, within a few blocks of the Empire State Building. Any view of New York skyline, you'll see both buildings, right? So the Chrysler Building, it just like sounds, the car company is still around, isn't it? Yeah, with it Chrysler, right? The Chrysler Building was the first building over 1,000 feet, and that was in 1931 or 1930, I think it was. So this building held the title of the tallest building on Earth. This structure is not a building. I misspoke. This structure, this tower, better way to say it, because that's what it's called, of course. This tower or structure held the title of the tallest, and it was built at that time. The only male, construction workers worked on it. So you can say man-made or human-built, whichever you prefer. Structure. It was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for over 40 years. It held it like 42 years. So for nearly half a century, you could just summarize it that way. For nearly half a century, it held that title. Now, this you don't have to write, because I'm going to give you a couple more facts about the meaning that you probably don't know. Those facts some people know, especially if you went there. I assume you knew some of that. But does anybody know why it wasn't made a full 1,000 feet? Why did the French stop at 980 some feet? Didn't they just go? Why didn't they all the way to 1,000? Anybody know the explanation? It's a simple explanation. Anybody know what's different about European measurements? No Americans seem to ever. Yeah, go ahead. Somebody, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, the metric system.
Yes,
how many meters is it?
Yeah, I think it's 300 meters or whatever. It's an even number of meters. So just, you don't have to write that, but you would want to say that it was just under 1,000 feet. And if you want to, you could add that fact that it was a number they chose for the height based on the metric system. Just keep it simple, which measures things, a little differently, right, than the English system we use. So they didn't think in terms of feet, and they thought in terms of meters. Okay, but a couple more facts about it is that it was about to be, this should surprise some of you, torn down after that fair, because this structure, like most World's Fair buildings or structures, just say structures, were not meant to be permanent. They were meant to be temporary, but people liked it so much. They took a vote, though, in Paris. Just citizens of Paris could vote. And barely a majority, I was like 51, you can just say slightly over half or a bare majority voted to keep the structure. Can you imagine if they turned it down? We wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. It's hard to imagine. People love it so much, and it's so famous and popular, such a major symbol of the country itself. But it almost got torn down. because these buildings or structures were meant to be temporary. By the way, when I go back, I'm going to go back just for a minute. The fact that this survived is an exception because this building wasn't meant, and it is a building here. This is a building, not a tower, not a structure. A building is meant to house people, right? Either, 24 hours a day or for working and living purposes. And so this structure was always being used throughout the next 80 or 90, was it almost 90 years before it burned down. So this was designed, the Crystal Palace, you'll have to write it, you've got enough notes on the meaning, not to be a temporary structure. So that's why it survived for several decades. But every other major World's Fair, almost every structure was designed to be temporary, including this. But enough people liked it that they forced these, I guess it was the city government, just to say, a vote, you can keep it simple, a referendum we call today, right? Like the recall we just went through, a referendum or vote, you can just say it that way, was taken and a bare majority voted to save it. And otherwise we wouldn't have it today. Okay, and then you could add that the architect, Eiffel, was an engineer first who had designed many bridges and other structures throughout France. So he was chosen to design this and he did a really good job. Now, what style is it? This is the last part of the meaning. It's Art Nouveau. I'll spell that second word. I don't think are we covering Art Nouveau? I think I made this. Yeah, I decided not to cram one more new unit in toward the end. So, have more chance to catch up if you do want to for, extra credit or turning in late work and study. So I'm not going to do Art Nouveau. I often did in this course, but Art Nouveau, 2 words, just like the first word, always spelled art. And then Nouveau is always with a capital Nouveau. It means new art. It's a style of art, not just architecture, but it applies to all visual arts, painting, drawing, sculpture, and architecture. Not so much photography, because it wouldn't work with photography. So it was a style of visual arts in France. It's not a new definition, but it's part of the meaning of this slide. Okay, it's the last fact on the meaning for your notes, which emphasized whiplash curves. And if we go down to the base here, you can get some idea. If, let's say, it's as close as I guess I could get, is the best image I could get that wasn't protected, you know what I mean, with big letters across it. So, this is as close as we can get, but just write this now, where the arrow is, where I'm using the cursor now. These are metal decorative features made, of course, out of the cast iron. This whole building is cast iron, which have a curve that goes just like a whip, up and over and back, like a whip would do. It's called, there's only, I can have to visualize it to know the term. It should be in your notes, is whiplash curves. This building has those. And then it also uses geometric decorative motifs borrowed from nature. That's the other part of what makes something Art Nouveau. Geometric decorative motifs that were borrowed from nature, mostly plant motifs. And those are only visible if you get up close, like in the bottom of the, here, there's some along the bottom of the windows on the first restaurant level. See, I never ate there. Who was it that said, did you go to the second one? Somebody read today just now.
Yeah, on the way up, you can, I've been to the top.
one?
On the way up, you can stop at
Yeah.
the first tier and at the second tier. And the cool thing about the second tier that I tell people is you can actually stop and have lunch or something there. Which
Yeah. I thought you could at both levels. So I guess it's just this. I haven't done that. I've only just gone to look at the view with friends and people I know that live in Paris when I'm there. Okay, so up here, though, is a gift shop, right? So these 3 levels. Now, then what's on this level? I thought that was, I'm pretty sure there's a restaurant on the first level. At least that's what they used to be. But it's also, does anybody know? Anybody who's been there recently remember enough that where we're looking at now, the largest, the first level of interior space. Is that a restaurant, a gift shop, or just an observation deck? I think it's a restaurant, pretty sure. This one would probably be a more, casual one, smaller, more formal. So anyway, when it was open, just say it this way, the last thing, there were 3 levels at which visitors could stop and either eat or buy souvenirs, as well as look at the view. These three levels were enclosed, all three, including the gift shop up here, though the observation deck is not here. That's why I was mentioning that scene from that movie, An American Werewolf in Paris. That you could jump off there. I don't think too many people have, but I imagine sometime in the history of this structure, it has had perhaps some tragic events occur. So anyway, there are three levels where people can get out of an elevator. You can walk up the stairs too. I did do that when I was in my 20s. I don't think I'd try it now. It's a lot of stairs, and you need to stop and rest, even if you're in excellent physical shape. It takes a lot of energy to walk, but you can go up on a staircase, or you can take an elevator, which most people do. And so those three levels were originally opened when the fair was on for visitors to either get something to eat or buy souvenirs or look at the view. Okay, now the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll do the formal elements right now, is this is not a building. A building, I've said, actually I already said this, but if it wasn't clear before, just to clarify, you don't have to write this in your notes, but there is a difference. Towers or structures that are tall and meant not to house people for working or living 24 hours a day. This structure actually had an apartment in it, and I don't know which level it was, for Eiffel during the fair. He lived in the Eiffel Tower. I didn't know that until I started teaching this class and doing more research. I don't think they tell you that on the tour. He actually spent, I don't mean every day for the entire 8 months or whatever, 9 months the fair was open. Usually World's Fairs are open for almost a year, and then they close at the end of that year. So the point is that during that year, while the World's Fair was open, he actually, you could write this if you want, Eiffel, the architect / engineer who designed it, actually lived in an apartment that he built for himself. I think that apartment is not used for anybody except maybe someone who supervises the structure might use it, or visiting dignitaries. I don't know. So you could actually say that there was a temporary, but that was not what it was built for. And it hasn't been used that way since. Not that I've ever read. So it wasn't meant for permanent 24-hour, 24/7, however you want to write that, inhabitants. It was meant for visiting only, for the view, and of course the tourist attraction that it has become. So that's a structure or tower, specifically if it's tall and narrow, you'd call it a tower. The CN Tower in Toronto, that's the tallest, I think it is in the world, a structure, but it's not the tallest building. That's Burj Dubai, right, in Dubai, which is pretty tall, but it isn't, I don't think it's as tall as the CN Tower in Toronto, which is not a building. It's just a tower to go look at the view of, Greater Toronto. So a tower and or building are two different things. A tower or / structure is never meant to be permanently inhabited or lived or worked in, whereas a building is. All right, let's do the formal elements. The color is a warm color. I love the color. It's almost like a rust. Some people call it reddish brown color, and that's obviously warm. The rhythm is so obvious with the girders and the decorative motifs, below the restaurants. There's the repeated patterns of plant motifs, whiplash curves, and the actual structural framing. Can you break it down into a separate masses? You could. I would just say it's one big mass, but you could say, well, the biggest mass is the shaft. The main part of the tower is what's above the second observation deck. And then it would be the ground level because it's so wide. And then the middle section here would be the third largest, if you choose to break it down. For space, I've already said, there is no, you don't have to write about interior space because it's just meant for temporary observation. So just the height is good enough, that it is over 980 feet or just under. You can keep it even simpler than that and say it's just under 1,000 feet tall. And it's the real space. There's no techniques for space at all. Now, then there is the dynamic. Oh, I don't see. Well, yes, there are straight lines, I'm sorry, along the observation decks, the three observation decks, but almost every other. In fact, I don't see any other straight lines. So it's mostly dynamic, of course, with only straight lines on the three observation levels, on the framing of them. Here, the line is visual. Again, no carved or painted or drawn line. The modeling is just the shadows created by the sun. And the texture is the real smooth texture of metal and glass, just like the last slide. There's no simulated textures that you can see here. You'd have to get up really close to look at the patterns of the leaf decor, but that you can't see that here. So you can just keep it simple. It's just the real textures, two textures, smooth, real glass and smooth, real metal. And yes, it's balanced left to right and unbalanced toward the bottom. That should be pretty obvious. Okay. How are we doing on time? We'll do one more slide. We'll go to about, well, we might be able to do two more, to about 4:20 today, okay? Because I had all those announcements and information that I wanted to give you at the beginning, so we started the slides a little later than usual. Okay, this is the next must know. And this one, I'm going to tell you right now, very, very high on the list of probable slides for the final, because it's so important as to what it's is symbolic of, let's say, or what's an example of. Okay, here we go. Sullivan, the architect's name, last name was Sullivan, Sullivan. Okay, and then it's the title, two words, Wainwright, one word, building. Wainwright, Wainwright. Again, Wainwright. Wainwright Building, 1891. Well, let's start with the fact that this is one of the oldest remaining skyscrapers in the world. Skyscrapers were invented in Chicago. That's why the style of early skyscrapers, that whole genre of architecture, it's both a style and a type of architecture. Chicago School, I gave you that. It's on that list, right? You should have the 5 main movements of early modern architecture. It's why it's called the Chicago School, because skyscrapers were invented in Chicago, not New York. You tell a New Yorker and they'll start arguing with you, and then you show them the facts. No way. The first skyscrapers were done in the 1880s in Chicago. And this architect was a Chicago architect, but the building is in St. Louis. I've been in it. It's beautiful. It's a National Historic Landmark, as well it should be, because it's one of the oldest remaining skyscrapers in the world. No, it isn't in the birthplace of skyscrapers. Several others in Chicago are older than this. There's still some left from the 1880s in downtown Chicago. Haven't been altered except for, updating the wiring and stuff. Even the elevators at some of those old ones, including this one, are the original elevators. So here's your last standalone definition that might appear in some way in the true false section of the final. Skyscraper. I guess it got off the bottom of the page, so I apologize. You can write down at the bottom the 3 main. Well, there it is. There it is. I'm sorry. No, it's right there. I'm sorry. I wasn't looking closely. The bottom of the last page, below what you already wrote, the 3 main features of skyscraper. So here we go. That would be the definition of skyscraper. Here we go. The 3 things that mark a building. Skyscrapers are always buildings, right? We already defined what a building and how it's different from a tower. So you should already have that clear from the last couple slides. So this is a building. So here we go. Skyscrapers are buildings which have 3 features. Okay. Number 1, 10 or more stories. It's not my definition. It's the American Institute of Architects. You don't have to write that, but that's the arbiter for all, architectural terms and histories is the American Institute of Architects. Been around for like 180 years or something. So according to their definitions, number 1 feature of all skyscrapers is that they're buildings with 10 or more stories, period. Okay. Second feature, is that they have electric elevators, period. Now you might say, weren't there electric elevators? No, they were invented at the dawn of the skyscraper. The first ones opened in Chicago the year the first skyscraper was designed. So there's no coincidence. That's clearly the 2 things had to go together. So a number 2 feature, again, for all skyscrapers that define a building as a skyscraper is an electric elevator. No one has improved on that since. I mean, they had what happened before. Well, there were no buildings 10 stories tall in New York or Chicago, the 2 biggest cities at that time in America, with multiple tall buildings, but they didn't reach 10 stories. The most they could reach is like 8. Why? Because they had hydraulic. You have to write this. It's just an explanation of why the second feature is essential to all skyscrapers for a building 10 or more stories. Because before the electric elevator was invented, so just hear this brief explanation and then we'll get back to the third feature. Before that, the elevators were run on hydraulic power, and you can't lift a hydraulic elevator more than 130 feet, which isn't high enough to go to 10 stories. Because every building that's a skyscraper anyway, certainly public buildings like skyscrapers, are going to have at least 10 feet on each floor. By the time you add the floor, the ceiling, the framework, between each floor, there's 10 feet or more. So 130 wouldn't have been enough. This building is about 150 or so feet tall, 160. So it's over 130. So hydraulic elevators, you have to keep it simple. If you want to write that, you don't have to, because it's a detail. But the fact is that the earlier form of pre-electric elevators could not have lifted people up high enough to get to a 10-story. Then who's going to want to go to work on the 10th floor of a building if you have your job in a office up on the top floor, if you can't get there by elevator? So electric elevators are the second element or feature of all skyscrapers. And the third is an internal metal skeleton. Now, that might surprise a handful of people, but I don't know how many of you have heard the conspiracy theories about 9/11. I'll say again, the third feature, very simple, an internal metal skeleton. And you could put in parentheses with I would underline the word very, rare exceptions. The only exception I know of, there must be a few others around the world, was the World Trade Center that got destroyed during 9/11. So put aside for now the notes. Does anybody know I know the conspiracy theories have different followings. I'm not even going to comment on that. But the fact is that the one about 9/11 being an inside job, because those buildings couldn't have collapsed because they had metal frames from just the amount of heat that an airplane jet fuel explosion would have caused. Oh, no, that's completely false. The architects were, just listen for a minute, Japanese. They came to New York to pitch their design in an international competition. The architects from all over the world competed, and they were chosen. But when they were chosen, this is on tape, and there are people alive that were at the hearing of the Planning Commission of New York's port. They're called the Port Authority that own that those buildings, that commissioned the architects. They testified under oath. We have one cautionary note that if a large airplane with fuel were to crash into the buildings, because the exterior skeleton is not the design for most skyscrapers, especially ones that are over 1,000 feet, we decided to do it differently so we could make those little fancy Gothic arches. Some of you know what I'm talking about. If you saw the photos of what was left after the buildings collapsed, was just some of the metal framing, about 10 stories up, and then, smoldering ruins around it. If you've ever seen those photos or news clips, you know what I'm talking about from 9/11, right after the collapse. So they designed it for aesthetic purposes, and they said it wasn't going to survive because the heat would be trapped inside the building and it would be magnified and the buildings would be in danger of collapse. And the Planning Commission voted, I don't know if it was unanimous, overwhelmingly, to ignore that potential risk. Because what are the odds of a jet plane crashing into either of those towers? Well, that was 1964 or 5 when that was signed. So there's your explanation, or discount, if you want to call it that, or disputing of that conspiracy theory. Because we had someone come to the Santa Rosa JC campus and peddle that theory, and I would have liked to gone to that meeting, but I wasn't in Santa Rosa that night. It's just not accurate at all. So internal metal skeleton is true of 99.99% of all skyscrapers. The few that aren't are taking a real risk. And one last fact, you might know, some of you, this story. In 1945, just before World War II ended, a B-17, biggest bomber the American Air Force ever had up to that point, huge, it could hold a crew of 20 some people and lots of jet fuel, crashed into the Empire State Building, but it didn't even remotely damage the building itself, except for, of course, that floor. There was, jet fuel that went inside that one floor, and it, of course, melted the windows on that level, burned the exterior that had to be cleaned, but the building barely shook because it had an internal metal skeleton, which is way stronger than an exterior metal skeleton. And those two incidents pretty much illustrate the difference and why almost every other building besides the World Trade Centers, every other skyscraper uses that third feature, an internal metal skeleton. Okay, so you have the features of the skyscraper. One last thing is who the architect was. I said he was from Chicago. He was the most famous American architect of his generation. And he taught a young man named Frank Lloyd Wright. Unfortunately for him, Frank Lloyd Wright's, we'll get to him later, they became enemies later. But when they worked together, they created some of the most advanced, can say, or, innovative, if you prefer, early modern buildings all over the all over the Midwest. It wasn't yet outside the Midwest. This building, though, was just Sullivan when he designed it. And it was the first skyscraper in St. Louis. Now, of course, you can see in this picture, there are others around it. So it's 10 stories, right? And inside, the original elevator still functions. There's an electric elevator that takes you all the way to the top. And then we have the internal metal skeleton. So the last thing about Sullivan is that he believed buildings should, quote, have something to delight the eye of the beholder. He had two maxims, you can say, or rules for designing buildings. So he's the first famous skyscraper architect. He didn't invent skyscrapers. You don't need to know who that was. Some guy no one knows about unless you are into this. So we'll just say Sullivan was the most famous and first really famous architect to design skyscrapers. His skyscrapers are all over the United States, but he started in the Midwest. So this building, last fact about the meaning now, has something to delight the eye of the beholder, and that's this ornament at the top, as well as in between each row of windows. Modern skyscrapers, there you go. You see, that's why I like using this photo. Nothing. They're just plain glass and steel boxes. We'll get to on Wednesday that movement called Bauhaus, which then did away with all ornament. So he believed that buildings should have, skyscrapers or any other public building that he designed would have some kind of ornament on it. But the most important maxim, or you can say slogan, motto, whichever word you want to use, saying, the most important saying he practiced in his firm was his whole career: form follows function. Some of you may have heard that phrase. It's still used today for different types of creativity, especially architecture. Form follows function. He didn't, again, coin that phrase, but he popularized it. He said any building, especially a skyscraper, the design of it should follow the function or purpose. So this is a tall, narrow building on a narrow lot. Well, narrow this way, of course. It's shallow lot, right? I mean, it's wide on the street, obviously. And so the building had to accomplish, enough space or encompass, enough space for it doesn't matter what, it was an insurance company, by the way. The Wainwright building was built for an insurance company. So they had plenty of room for their workers, their offices, and their clients to come to this building. And they needed so much square footage. And the only way to do it on a lot of this dimensions, this, shallow here, wide on the front, was to build up. So form follows function was one of his sayings. He didn't coin it again, but he made it popular. He was known all over the United States. His lectures would draw thousands of people. Can you believe that? Maybe Frank Gehry could get that many people to pay to hear him speak. And Frank Lloyd Wright did all the time. But this guy, Sullivan, was the first famous American architect to draw large crowds to his lectures all over the US. His books were bestsellers. He was a household name. And I'm sure nobody here's ever heard of him unless you know something about architecture. But his most famous claim to fame now is that he trained Frank Lloyd Wright, who, of course, later outshone him and became much more famous. All right, plenty of information. And so we will then wrap it up with a formal analysis. It's a warm color, very beautiful color, isn't it? A reddish brick. And that is the real texture of rough brick and smooth glass. You can't see the metal here. It's an internal, remember, skeleton. Well, you could say the metal framing if you want to. So yeah, you could say real smooth textures of metal and glass and real rough brick. Okay, on the exterior walls. Now this is also metal and it's smooth, and that's a decorative detail. So there, you could say that's simulated because it's supposed to be a bunch of vine. It's Art Nouveau, actually. That's what you see here, some French influence at the top that he had studied in Paris, like most architects did back then. So he'd seen Art Nouveau in France when he was studying there, Sullivan. So these are the only simulated textures are the plant motifs in metal. There's no technique for modeling. Again, it's just the natural shadows from the sun. Here, the lines are all visual, as is usually the case. You could say that they're, I guess you could say they're sculptural or sculpted, yeah, here, because this is cast metal. But that's stretching it. I would just keep it simple and say the lines are visual wherever the sun creates, the edges, visual effect of lines around the windows and at the corners. It's all one mass. It is a 10-story building that is about 150 feet. Just keep it around, or almost, or about 150 feet tall, with one large open lobby and then a series of smaller offices. That's how the interior is used. Just keep it simple. And then we have it stable. I don't see anything dynamic except the decorative detail, because these are porthole windows, so that the decorative ironwork does circle around them. So that's the only thing dynamic, and it's pretty minor. The structure itself is totally stable and a single mass and completely balanced, totally symmetrical. And then let's see, are we forgetting anything here? Texture, mass, modeling, line, balance. I think I've covered everything. Yep. Okay, any questions? I will stick around as long as people have. So we will go from this point forward, but these first 3 slides, at least one of them is going to be for sure on the final. Okay, anybody have any questions? Let's stop the share and we'll back to speaker view. Anybody about extra credit, what we've covered just now? If you joined a little late, I don't think anybody joined after the first slide started, right? Because you should all have heard those. Obviously, this will be posted on, mea culpa, I forgot on Friday, I had some kind of a family event I had to focus on Friday evening. It took some planning too. So I wasn't able to get this videos on YouTube until I think it was around noon on Saturday. So most people aren't going to check on Friday night, right? So if you wondered, if you did check, you might have known. Okay, what is the name of the book? It's you're talking about this one? Yeah. Julia Morgan, Architect of Beauty. It's important because there's about a dozen books about her, but it's the only one with your teacher's name right there on the bottom. And it is also in the student bookstore, but I do think you could save money if you didn't already have it by buying it on Amazon. I just don't know how long the delivery takes. I don't think they're backlogged. I know my publisher, I just checked with them over the weekend, still has it in stock. Sure of that.
I have a question.
Pardon?
I do have a question. Probably you are already answered, but it is worth the extra credit if we take a picture of some of the Petaluma houses.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to, yeah, if you get the book and you open it to page 170, right? Because maybe some people didn't hear that. You'll see there are 4 Julia Morgans. I described them in a paragraph each, but there are 4 photos, one of each, the exteriors. That's all you need is one photo of each exterior. Put them all together into one PDF of 4 photos and just give me the addresses, your name and the class, and you get 10 points. I think you'll see they're beautiful. They're no 2 alike too. That's another thing. She was very versatile. We'll get to her, of course, later and what made her such an important and successful architect, besides being the first woman to have her own office, independent of a man or male partner. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Matt, for putting that up. Okay, now any other questions? We covered a lot, I know, but I'm trying to go slow, as you notice. Only 3 slides to start with. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I had turned in the assignment or the paper on Wednesday. I was just wondering if you had gotten it for me.
Oh, which one? Because I'll tell you, I logged them in. I see if someone said in their actual tagline or when I opened the email before I either downloaded to grade or sent to a reader, I would then respond. But that's fine to do it verbally. Okay, I'm sorry, who is that now speaking?
It's me, Paula News.
Okay, yeah, I'm 99% certain I did. Yep. Yes, yours has been logged in. Give us until next week to get between me and the readers. And also I'm trying to actually go ahead and grade any that I get late. Don't forget, if you just joined late, you guys have until, if you didn't turn the paper in yet, it'll only be 5 points off, not 10. If you get it in before midnight on Wednesday, because I extended the deadline. So it's still under a week, less than a week late. If you do send it to me before midnight on the 17th. Okay, so that gives you guys who haven't turned it in yet a little extra incentive to not wait another 2 weeks or whatever. Then it would be 10 points off.
I know this is a very late question to ask, but I also haven't got the score for my midterm. I was wondering if you can send it
Yeah, just send me an email because then I will respond. Probably won't be tonight. Might be tonight, but by tomorrow. I definitely check all my emails at least 5 days a week. But when I teach Mondays and Wednesdays, pretty much back-to-back 2 classes, I don't always get to my email that day. So just send me an email, and either tonight, there's a good chance you'll see it tonight, but if not, tomorrow by midday, I will send you that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody else? Any questions about grading, extra credit, or the material we just covered? Okay, I'll see you all on Wednesday, and then we're going to probably get to Julia Morgan and Maybeck, and that's an important subject because at least one of those must-knows, yes, we will be, it's going to be on the final for sure.
Thank you very
All right.
much.
All right, thank you, guys. Take care. Have a good evening. All right, bye.